AI has been around for, I don't know, a year, 2 years, probably even more. And if the promise would have been fulfilled, then we should have seen the world GDP double by now, and we should have seen global wealth and so on. And that hasn't happened. And it hasn't happened despite the best brains in the world working as hard as possible, trying to get the best out of the technology.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of CTO Confidential. I'm here with Mooly Beeri, the founder of BetterSoftware.dev and a longtime software person, as you described yourself. You've been around for a long time. So this is a really awesome episode because I love learning about how software was and where we're at. So I'm going to kick it off to you with talk to me about your origin story. Let's get right into it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for hosting me. Yeah, so I'm an all-time software guy. I started programming when I was 11. That makes more than 40 years ago. And yeah, I started out with the likes of Texas Instrument and Commodore 64 and Sinclair Spectrum and all these early age computing. And yeah, and I've always been quite fascinated with programming. I went to school and did my degree in computer science, and then I went through quite a lot of different experiences, many startup companies, many years in Microsoft, where I caught my initial passion around software excellence, and then my first real trial with software excellence came when I was in Philips, and I was lucky enough to be asked to establish the first software center of excellence for the corporate. So I had to come up with something. So I created a framework, which is now a separate business, and did that for a couple of years. And then I spun off that framework to a separate business, which is Better Software. And basically now delivering the same software excellence framework to multiple businesses. I've been the head of software transformation for several large corporations, and now I'm working with the likes of Mercedes, ZF, Roche, so very large enterprises. And it's all about helping them deliver world-class software. So faster time to market, less customer issues, less cost of R&D, and so on. So that's, I don't know, what was it, 60 seconds,
Look,
my origin. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's so cool because one of my favorite television shows is *Halt and Catch Fire*, and I don't know if you've ever seen that on AMC, but it's kind of I feel like it's like a blend of *Soul of the New Machine* and the founding of maybe Compaq, kind of like blended into like this fictional story. And I always found it very fascinating to what it would have been like to be involved in computing at the time. And I think even that book, Soul of a New Machine, has like an entire chapter where they're debugging like one single thing in the microcode overnight, days, just weeks under the hood, so to speak. And it's such a different world now because it feels like everything moves so much faster. And yeah, it's a very, and of course the continuous delivery, the way we ship software, it didn't have to be so perfect. But you're working at companies like Mercedes, where arguably with like onboard systems, you don't really get the same luxuries you do with today's software. So I love the idea of these better software frameworks. I think they're still applicable. How would you say that this compares to something like an Agile type frame, like for people who are familiar with Agile framework and the flavors of Agile? How does your framework compare with that?
Yeah. So Agile and I'm going to probably upset a couple of people, but Agile in its essence is pick some topic, fix it, improve it, and move to the next topic. Yeah, it's all about iterative learning and improvement, and the practical implementations of Agile today most often miss out on the improvement component. So you see teams going through iteration after iteration, doing more or less the same thing without adapting their processes. So you ask a team, how much time do you spend in an iteration to write code? And they're like, 4 weeks writing code, 2 days of testing, 5 minutes retrospective, and then we start all over again. And so the improvement part, which is supposed to be very essential to Agile, is very often neglected, and the processes remain the same, the system remains the same, and so the results never improve. So with the framework that we use, it's iterative as well. It's just that we make the analysis of processes and the improvement a tangible part of the iteration itself. So every iteration has to include a conscious improvement of a single process step, and to make it a little bit less abstract. For instance, you end up a iteration, and then you look at the bugs that you found, and you try to analyze which of these bugs could have been found if you had done a better code review. And then you derive from this list of bugs a set of changes to the way you do code review. Maybe different people need to participate in the code review. Maybe you need to have a checklist or a different checklist or an AI tool that does the code review for you or whatever. But just experiment with a different way of doing code review and then measure it again at the end of the next iteration. And without noticing, through a couple of iterations, you have already improved your code review process. And so I think this framework, I think it's more agile than if you compare it to existing agile frameworks. I think our framework is also very, very agile, but I think it's closer in its intention to the original Agile Manifesto, which just celebrated, what was it, 25 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that. But you're absolutely right. I think that every company I've been at, I think the engineers mostly would complain about this, that we never get a chance to go backwards. Because from a from a stakeholder standpoint, they're like, well, it's out, it works. And I often wonder if AI almost makes that process even worse now. But I also say that I kind of going back to those test-driven development principles, it's very similar to that, where it's, hey, we found a bug, and this bug may be operational. You need to write a failing test so that we know what caused the bug, so that we can detect the bug, and then fix it. So like your example is, we detected the bug is code review. How do we make, and maybe it's checklist, which is something that hospitals introduced, right? That's a very common case study, is hospitals introduced checklist, and suddenly like errors started going down because people had a checklist to go through.
Yeah.
But man, is code review kind of on the run these days? I feel like I think that people are very hot on this idea of, I don't look at the code, I don't code review, I just send it all out, and I'm very curious if that's all clickbait.
So I want to divert into two lines of thought, and tell me which one do you want to expand on a little bit more. First is the concept of AI makes everything faster or makes everything worse. So we can expand on that. And I agree with you that AI is an accelerator, but it's also it's an accelerator of code generation, but it's also an accelerator of technical debt at the same pace. And so using it without the proper controls in place, that's just going to get you faster into the wrong place. So we can expand on that as one line of thought. And the other line of thought is, if you go back even earlier days before Agile into the works of Deming, and you see that most of the problems you face in organizations are because of the system design, the combination of processes and tools, and the way the system is structured. And then the focus on trying to improve the individuals, trying to improve the developers, is always almost always to fail. and the need to analyze how the system performs and understand where your bottlenecks are. So this is your last comment just made me think of these two routes, and we can expand on each of those
Yeah.
as you see fit. Yeah.
Yeah, let's start. The system one is very interesting because I think this argument. What I like about discussing this is, everybody says that AI has disrupted everything, and I always think like, well, yes and no. I like to look backwards. I like to say, things that are old will become new again, and I
Yeah.
think that that's starting to happen where people are like, oh, I need to think in patterns. I need to know design patterns and systems design because that's now what matters. And I'm not spending all this time. And a lot of folks have just, quite frankly, not learned any of that or spent any time on it. So
Yeah.
you end up with a lot of tech debt. So I'd love to dig into that because I feel like that's going to lead us into what you need to be successful with AI.
Okay. Okay. So I'll give you a radical example of a faulty system design. I have one client, I won't name the name, but I have one client where they are working under extreme schedule pressures, and all of their projects are designed in a way that implementation is done and the code is delivered to the customer and for testing at the same time. Okay. So the testing happens in parallel for customer also using the system for the first time. So in that extreme case, do you think it matters how good is the software tester? The software tester, regardless of how professional they are, regardless of how much automation they have, regardless of how much proficiency they have, they will never find the problems before the customer because by design, they get to see the code at the time the customer sees the code as well because of time pressure. And so with this system design, of course, this is an extreme example, but a real one. I have such clients now. And in that design, there's no wonder that you have a really high number of customer escapes because why wouldn't you? I mean, the customer is actually your tester. And so you risk customer reputation issues and customer escalation issues by design. And I have many other such examples where, for instance, by design, the CI/CD has a lot of automation testing, which is good. But there are so many tests and they're failing so often that it's acceptable for tests to fail. And so every night you have 4,000 passing tests, 1,000 failing tests, and the code still gets integrated and released. Okay. So in that environment, it doesn't matter how good is the DevOps guy. Okay. The DevOps guy doesn't make the rules. The DevOps guy can flag the failing tests and require attention, but the overall system is not designed in a way that prioritizes true CI/CD culture. And so there are many, many of those examples. And this is where you need to look at the system holistically, understand its weak points, and try to fix the environment in which people work. Okay.
Right.
And not focus on, there are so many tools today which drive me crazy. They measure developer productivity, the number of lines of code, the number of changes, the number of mouse clicks, the churn, whatever. And it's always the wrong focus. The problem is not keeping developers busy. The problem is designing a system which makes sure everyone is the most effective it can be. So
That's so poignant because I've always said this too with our CI/CD. I always say that no, nothing can deploy as long as something is failing in that system because what's the point of having it if we allow a deploy past the test suite one time? It's sort of the what's there's a famous book by I think it's Andy Hunt that talks about this, where it's like a no broken windows effect. Like if you allow one broken window, suddenly the broken windows are an acceptable
yeah,
thing, and so you can't really ever allow this. Now the tricky part is with testing, especially I think with front end testing and UI testing has this issue with me, where things change and tests fail because the tests are poorly designed, because they're testing code that is likely to change but not be broken. I think that is a very common that almost lets this creep in where people are like, I'm just trying to get 100% test coverage because of some tool oh yeah, I put a tool in that says I need better code quality, and then they start testing everything. Does the text do this? I go, well, the label text on that input is subject to change and not be a bug, and now your test suite breaks and you feel like the tail's
Yeah.
wagging the dog a little bit.
Yeah. No, I agree. And the analogy I use a lot is you're putting in place a lot of traffic lights which are always red. And if you have a neighborhood that is full of red traffic lights, you know what? The next thing that happens is everyone runs a red light because the traffic light is always red. So what can you do?
Right.
And so you have a lot of traffic lights which are red. The CI/CD is broken. You have bugs from your customer. You have missed checklists in your code review. And so you've got a lot of red lights. Everyone still moves on. And you have a broken system. In that broken system, what you need to fix is exactly what you said. You need to have the right culture, which says this is the culture I'm trying to preserve, and that would generate the right behavior. And in that environment, people can flourish and can be very effective. Yeah.
You know, another area that this is, this is actually more common in my career is like the pager duty going off all the time. And effectively, if the fire alarm is always on, you start to ignore real
Yeah.
bugs. And so that's another thing that I've been very vigilant about. And some of these tools, again, like there's a lot of tools we use, especially around front end error logging, that just every little thing that happens to a person in the browser gets logged. And so it becomes this idea of like, well, there's just so many errors. I'm never going to, which ones are real, which ones are fake? How do I fix these things? So if you don't get a handle on this, and that's why on our software, I try to have this idea of, listen, there can be no error that we don't investigate and fix. And if it is an error that we deem is not worth logging, then it needs to stop logging immediately, and we need to kind of deem that like, and possibly document the reason why we've decided that this was an acceptable type of error.
Yeah, it's one aspect that's usually being ignored is that tests in themselves, they need to have a definition of done. So people write tests as if they are just they can throw any test at the system, and then they end up fighting test stability issues and failing tests where no one really understands what the failing test means and what's the impact on the end customer. And so it's like when you put a test into your suite, it's like you release it into production. The production of a test is when it comes into your test suite. And so you should have a definition of done for a test, like the test needs to run 100 times on a stable build and not fail because of environment issues, or 1,000 times, or overnight, or whatever. You should have some stability criteria for a test. And if it fails and you look at it and you say, it's fine, we can carry on, then you need to disable this test because you've basically gave it a shot. You looked at the signal it generates, and the signal is meaningless. So, one thing is the definition of done for tests, and the other is something most people never do is policy on phasing out tests, deciding when tests are obsolete, are no longer providing relevant signal. And so you see test suites that are always growing, always failing with thousands of failures. And you have always this one integrator who knows by heart that usually 1,074 tests are failing. And so
Right.
if they see in the morning 1,075, okay, they write a small script to see which is the new test that failed, and they look at that, and maybe they adapt their mental model to look for 1,075 going forward. And then again, the system is flawed. Again, we go back to this always red traffic light.
It's very interesting because I think a lot of folks I have the luxury since I started my own agency. I work on a lot of very much a ton of greenfield projects, so I could keep them in a good state from the beginning and kind of
Yeah.
enforce that and say, hey, I want everything green across the board, not all the things we're talking about. But what you describe in my past is way more common than people realize. Is as software grows, a couple of tests fail, and it's funny because I've noticed even with Claude, like when I'm working with Claude Code, sometimes a test will randomly fail. Like just last night, this happened. Actually, I'm working on something with timers. A test failed, and it goes, "This wasn't related to my changes, so it's okay." And I'm like, "It's not okay. You also now need to fix that test. Yes, it doesn't belong, and it doesn't match what the PR is, but there was a temporal problem and it needed it. There was a clear fix. It fixed it. But if you sort of let that one go, and then everybody on your team is letting one or two or three go because they were unrelated to the thing, well, then that one defeats the whole purpose of the test. That the tests are designed to make sure unrelated stuff doesn't break. So it's very interesting to me though how many people who work on greenfield don't realize like this state of mass failing tests is everywhere. And then
Yeah.
the thing I would ask you is AI helping you guys address that? Like, are you finding like, okay, now we can do a sprint where, because when you have 1,000 failing tests, it almost feels like we're never going to get over this. We should just throw them all out and start over again.
Yeah, so 2 points on that. First is the really the need to work with legacy code, and I think there's that there's one thing that is faster than the speed of light, and that's the speed when code becomes legacy code. You write code, and 2 hours later, that's legacy code. We can't touch it. We forgot about it. The guy who wrote it left, and so legacy code. And most projects, to be honest, are not greenfield. Most projects start with, let's take some similar version from our past, which seems somehow similar to the new requirements, copy it over and start modifying it. And so there's one line of thought which is around dealing with these legacy software bases, and you need to accept the state it's in. So if it was released with these 1,000 failures or whatever, then take these 1,000 failures, put them to sleep, say this is my baseline, and then start handling only new failures from that moment on. But new failures have to be addressed because there is a lot of literature around the amount, the percentage of regression that happens due to code changes, and it's usually quite astounding to understand that even one line change has a probability of more than 60% to produce regression somewhere in a code base. And so when you as a developer make a change, you have created a regression. It's not a question of if. It's just a matter of whether it will be caught by you, by the regression suite, or by your customer. Okay?
Right.
Now, you ask whether AI is helping here. So I have clients using AI for various phases of the software development lifecycle. And I think it's useful if it's used with the right guardrails. So it needs to be used and governed, because if you let Claude Code generate code, you immediately get so much code which becomes your problem to maintain. And it becomes a liability because there is a lot of technical debt. You won't be able to understand what the problems are when you won't be able to understand what the fixes are. And so you're immediately spiraling into chaos. So the examples that I have for clients using AI in productive ways are where they use AI for specific phases of the software development lifecycle with the right human governance before and after. Okay,
Right.
so for instance, you can use very nicely AI to do the debugging for you, but you have to own the fix. You can use AI to find patterns within your defects, your bugs. So what are common patterns in my bugs which probably need some area that needs refactoring? But when you have the insight, you have to do the refactoring. Otherwise, you outsource the entire stack to someone else, and you have no controls in place. I have another client where the code review is assisted by AI,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a good way of doing that when it's assisted by AI, because it's like radiology can be assisted by AI to help the radiologist look at some interesting areas and decide whether it's finding or not. But I wouldn't let AI decide whether something is um, a disease or not. Yeah.
Right,
Um,
right.
and and also I have one more example of really good use of AI. When you get a new requirement and you want to understand where in the entire pool of projects and other bits of software you've ever developed, there is another requirement similar to that thing, where you
Mm-hmm.
can just maybe take a full piece of requirement code testing that is already baked in some other project. And so today this is done by um, architects who look at the requirement and say, I think we did something similar maybe
Mm-hmm.
3 years ago. I think there was this project. Maybe we can look. So you have your entire IP, and you can have AI read that and give you the most similar pieces of requirements that were already implemented. And then you can start from the best reference point that you have. But then you have to do the actual work.
Right.
Yeah. So,
That's very good. It's interesting because pausing there, that happens for me at an agency. There are times when I'm working across a lot of different clients and a bunch of us, and the same thing happens to me. I go, we did this like 2 years ago for this customer, same thing, and now I can sort of like I've thought about that as like if AI could kind of get like if almost it had like a RAG database of sorts of things we've done before, so that we're not, because they're not exactly repeatable where they could be packages. That's like people are like, oh well, you can make packages. I go, yeah, but there's a lot of these things that are they got too many changes to be a
yeah,
straight copy and paste,
yeah,
but it's similar enough that you could start there.
yeah. And so you can, if you are diligent about your requirements, then you can start from the requirement and you can go into um, identifying a similar enough requirement. And usually that's enough to point you in the direction of the full stack. You can take a requirement, a piece of code, a piece of test, and then at least you start at the best starting point possible for you. Yeah. Um, and the the best thing there is when you take such a piece into as your starting point, you can also rely on the results you've seen for that specific piece. You know what customer feedback has been there. You know how stable it is. So you're already starting from quite a stable place. So
Yeah.
that's a good
It,
way of using AI. And if we zoom out a little bit, everywhere where you have a lot of data and you need someone to read it, digest it, and give you the best way to navigate the data, that's perfect use of AI. When you need to do something smart with the data, it had better be the human being. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree, because it'll definitely give you these false sense of security there, and it's so it's interesting because especially in the agency context, again, we're a smaller agency. A lot of folks are working alone, so we
Mhm.
used to have like a code review where we had like a code review channel, and you could just pull an engineer from another project to review your code. But of course, that was fraught with all sorts of little issues because the engineers sometimes just weren't familiar with what you were doing or what you were trying to do. So they could spot like obvious code smells and things that could be done better. But it wasn't the same as having like a team of 2 or 3 or 4 people that all were working on the same code base. And so I think one thing that AI has helped us with is kind of providing everyone with almost a little bit more of a personal reviewer that can sit there and double check the work. Of course, people are already generating the code, so I find that it's almost more useful to like do the generation, but then kind of say, okay, now I want to now I have to review this, but I'm going to ask a lot of questions about, did you consider this? Did you consider that? And figure out, it's just a very different way to develop. I'm not, it's definitely faster. I'm not sure if I enjoy it more or less. That's one thing we've talked about with a lot of folks is the joy in building
Yeah,
removed a little bit.
I'm still on the fence on whether it's faster or not. To be honest, the code generation part is definitely faster, but getting to shippable software, I'm not sure that's faster. There are jokes about now the code generation takes 80% faster, but the debugging takes 80% more.
Yep.
But it's just, um, I think that in the process of writing the code today, if you write the code manually, you have time to also consider the requirements, to find some uh, contradictions, to go back to the person who wrote the requirements and question some things and challenge some of the assumptions, and go back to the requirement owner and maybe adapt a little bit the requirement to simplify it so that there is and while you work on the code, you work with the person who's going to test it, and you try to design a test case together, and then the test person can say, well, there's a simpler way of doing that. Why don't we do it like that feature? And so there is um, the creation process, which I think might seem slower, but is probably more effective in the long run. And it's fine if you need some boilerplate code, like get me I don't know, the some skeleton of a microservice. Okay, so yeah, that's fine. So AI will replace what we used to do with Stack Overflow, right?
Right. Right.
Get me the database structure, and fine. Okay, so if you need the boilerplate, yeah, that's fine. Don't spend any time on writing these things. But anywhere where there is business logic, uh, it needs to make sense to you. It needs to be logical to you. And yeah, so anyway, it's interesting times for sure with the involvement of AI, and there is a lot of pressure of becoming better um, with the use of AI. But I think it's a bit it's a little bit confusing and definitely overwhelming to many people, even to the owners of to the creators of Claude Code. I mean, they last week they released a code review agent that costs
Oh my
$25
God.
for an MR review. So it's like they say we generate code, but hey, it's not good code. So why don't you buy our code review service and have our code review service review the code you generated with our code generator? And then you go, why wouldn't you just generate code that passes whatever your code review agent is going to do? So anyway, it's I think everyone is in this massive trial and error thing, and it will take some time until it stabilizes and people find the proper use for the technology, and will probably find that it gives some benefit in some phases, and yeah. Um,
Not as much in others. Yeah, it's so interesting you bring up because I remember that code review, and it reminds me of like basically here. I don't know if it's like this in Italy, but here in the United States, everywhere you go now, they're like just a quick question on the screen, and it's like the three tips, and it's like 30. It just feels like it's creeping up. Like just to get a cup of coffee, it's like, oh, you want to add another, and I was like, oh, the coffee only costs $3. Like I was like, I would tip 100% on this thing, and it felt like that too, where it's like, wait, you generated the code, but the code review costs $25. I do think it's a little bit of of a peering ahead at what's to come. And I hate making like predictions like this, but Claude Code right now, I pay for the max plan. It's $200 a month. It's definitely valuable. For me, I run a very small shop. Cash flow is difficult. I tell people I have to remain profitable. You know this too, because you're running a small consultancy. It's like we don't have this massive amount of cash to just burn through doing things. And so AI helps me do more than I normally would have, but I do spend a lot more time testing. Than I had if I was handwriting everything, but I can context switch a little bit more effectively. But it's not lost on me that the cost of these tools probably could go up and should go up. And they kind of let loose that they're actually taking a loss on a lot of these tools.
Yeah.
And I wonder, at what point would I say that the cost of the tool is now more expensive than just handwriting the code? And is the future something more like like almost like a writing a spec but using a lower end open source model to help generate code? But I think that a lot of us are getting super hooked on the generation, and we're going to get the rug pulled out on us, where it's just like, and actually, since this replaces an employee, I'm going to charge you at least half of what an employee would have cost.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I I work with a lot of clients that already use code generators for many years with model-based development. So it's not exactly the same, of course, but if you look at people who work with MATLAB or other model-based development models, then they write a model, it generates the code, right? Um, and we see a similar thing now, except that the model is
Natural
freestyle,
language.
freestyle natural language, which is obviously error prone. Um, and I, I, I'm not. I'm also not in the field of giving predictions, but I would say what's obvious to me is that there is a full software development lifecycle, and it contains of multiple steps. Code generation is just one step out of 30 or 40 things you need to do to ship world-class software. Gradually, people understand that taking AI and replacing just the code generation step is insufficient. You start seeing a lot of people saying, well, hey, code generation was never the problem. Actually, we don't have good requirements. Actually, we don't have good CI/CD. Actually, we don't have good testing. Actually, we don't have good code review. And my prediction is that gradually you will see an environment where you have AI agents across the entire software development lifecycle talking to each other and replacing the roles of the different people who played their roles today across the software development lifecycle. Whether this will be cost effective or not, I'm not sure. I have my doubts. If Anthropic wants $25 to do a code review, I think today the human code review costs less than $25, but it depends in which country. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to see how this thing develops. But I feel like, I mean, if you look a year back, the most prevalent prediction was software engineers will be out of work, right?
Yep. Yep.
We're a dead breed. That's it, extinct. No need for software engineering anymore. I think today you won't find these predictions anymore. You'll find maybe a little bit more hesitant predictions. And AI has been around for, I don't know, a year, 2 years, probably even even more. And if the promise would have been fulfilled, then we should have seen the world GDP double by now, and we should have seen
Yep.
global wealth and so on. And that hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened despite the best brains in the world working as hard as possible trying to get the best out of the technology. Okay, so it's not of lack of effort, and so many people say when we have this discussion all the time, and many people respond, well, wait, this is just the beginning. It will be much better, and and I'm like, maybe, okay, I've been around for a while, maybe it's gonna be better. But these probabilistic language models have already been trained on everything there is to train,
Right,
right?
right. They've got all the existing code. It's
They have
not,
everything. They're now training on their own output. So how will this get a lot better? I'm not sure, but maybe the next evolution is just around the corner. I don't know.
it's interesting you bring that up because when AI first came out and I had this everyone was like, well, now you got to change all your marketing, right? And I said, I made this mistake a few years ago of changing all our marketing to be very Web3 focused because everybody said that crypto was going to take over the world and it was going to be the next big thing and we're going to build web applications totally differently. And so I started learning this, and then as I was learning it, I just couldn't help, and I was like, I'm not a very old or I don't have a ton of experience. I've been in this industry a little like 15 years now, so nowhere near your level of experience. But I kept thinking to myself, but the databases I had did all of this faster. And they're like, no, but this is open. It's free. I go, but I don't know if people want that. I was like, I don't want everything on a ledger. I don't want to think that one mistake lives on the ledger forever. I leak a piece of PII, I never can change it again. I said, this actually seems like the worst, and I would ask these questions. I go, maybe I don't get it. Maybe I'm the dumb one. And then, of course, 3 years later, Web3 is basically dead. It's a casino. We all bet on. Everybody knows we all own a little Bitcoin. We all bet on it because just like you would go to Vegas with your buddy and you think maybe my number will come up today. We're all thinking that maybe this shit coin will come up today and we'll get to retire, but it never seems to happen. And so while there may be valid applications of Web3, people trying to implement everything with it was not going to work. And I came into AI with the same hesitancy. And here, 2 years later, we talk about AI all the time because it definitely has revolutionized kind of my ability to run this business in terms of like the output. Because when you run an agency, everybody's thing is like the billable hour. You're like a slave to this billable hour, and it's never fast enough. The customer never feels like it's fast enough.
Yeah.
And so finally, you're able to help people's visions come true at a faster rate. But you are right. There's like this testing component. And then at the same time, I said, I'm building more applications than ever. But they're not succeeding at a faster rate. You're building things people don't want faster. And which is, I suppose, good. Faster, more cheaply. Because before, people would spend $100,000 building a piece of crap. Now you spend $10,000 building a piece of crap. And nobody wants. It's not that it's crap, but it's just, okay, I realized that maybe the market didn't demand this thing from me. And someone brought this up on X, and it was just, the problem was never the code. It was that you don't have good ideas. And without the good ideas, what different, and I've thought about that. If a piece of software is going to make you 100 millionaire even, what difference does it make if you build it in a day, a month, or a year? If you told me 5 years from now, if I worked on this thing every day, I'm going to have $100 million, I'd put everything on credit cards. I'd tell my family, just hang on. 5 years from now, we're going to have $100 million. Don't even worry about it. That's the real trick of software or any business is, who the heck is going to buy this thing?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I've used this similar analogy in some of my latest conversations with some AI folks, that if AI is so successful, just use the following prompt. Hey, dear ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, here is my bank details. Write an app that will make me rich. Wake me up when there's $1 million in the bank. Good luck. You figure out the business, you figure out the clients, you figure out the marketing. Just wake me up when there's $1 million in the bank, or 100 million or whatever. Yeah. And of course it doesn't really help. And I think it goes back, if we just close a full circle now, back to Deming and the system design, the thought that if you can replace the software creation part the typing of the code, that would make the entire system more successful. That's just proving to be wrong in many
Mm-hmm.
many businesses, and it's just and the fact that this becomes so easy is just accelerating that understanding. And so my
Right.
guess is we'll see more AI applications around requirements and around business analytics and around testing and around, and around the entire software development lifecycle.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so that you can actually generate better business out of your efforts and not just create quickly the code. Yeah, I mean, it's always fun watching Claude Code generate code. Yeah, it's like, hey,
It's
all
wonderful.
of this, yeah, it's great. But
It's
then,
Tony Stark like. You feel I
you know,
said you feel like Tony Stark. You're just like, just like make me the suit. You know what I mean? I'm gonna fly the thing.
yeah,
it, it's very interesting. It's I think that it's poignant. People need to hear this type of stuff because admittedly there's a lot of like grandstanding, and of course sometimes I say look at who's doing the grandstanding. The best example is Anthropic says software engineering is dead, but they're hiring more engineers than ever. You've got all these platforms trying to get people like Replit. I was always like, yeah, of course they want non-technical people to build with their platform because now you're locked. Now you're not buying Salesforce, you're buying Salesforce from Replit and you're having to maintain it yourself. But you've recreated, so you've gotten off of SaaS, but the new thing is selling this whole infrastructure lovable into folks, and you're just as vendor locked in before if you don't have someone that truly can tweak the system, and you're almost worse off because now the code can be in such bad shape that you actually can't get a professional to fix it.
yeah. You're right. You're right. It's uh, interesting times. Let's see how this evolves. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'd love to pivot the topic a little bit because you run your own consultancy,
huh?
and a lot of folks, a lot of people, the layoffs are concerning to a lot of folks. A lot of my old engineering colleagues are getting into consulting, and I took the leap when times were good, and as you did, and now it's actually looking to be looks like it was a pretty good gamble to jump into entrepreneurship and running your own business because you're a bit in control. And a lot of them come to me and they're like, well, how do I even begin to get clients? So like taking a little departure, one of the hardest things is maintaining a client base, a lead flow, and doing your craft. And I noticed that you had done a podcast on this, and I thought your insights were really interesting. So I love kind of getting into this because a lot of folks are jumping into this world of gig work and consulting, and man, is it hard to find a lead these days.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think when we go into consulting, the easy part is doing your job because you've been a professional for quite a long time. You know you're good at what you do, and then if you have a client, it's relatively easy if you're half decent to satisfy that client. Okay, this is what you've been doing most of your professional career, and now suddenly you need to do a lot of stuff which you haven't done before at all, like business development and marketing and sales, and trying to convince people to be your clients. And so I've personally, I tried many different approaches, so I can definitely tell you a lot of things that do not work, and a few that do work. Um, so the um, I would say the biggest myth that doesn't work is that you can just mass broadcast your services over LinkedIn with some campaigns and go to market automations, send messages to 30 people, 50 people a day so you don't get blocked by the framework, offer your services, say how good you are, and then you'll get a lead flow. That is, unless you're providing a very commoditized service, that usually doesn't work. And it doesn't work because at the core of it, when people hire a consultant, they hire someone they can trust. Okay, they hire someone from the outside, someone they can trust to come into their house and help them do something they can't do on their own. And the ability to trust someone you don't know is almost non-existent. And so when you're broadcasting your services to hundreds of people, you're basically saying to strangers, hey, trust me, I'm really good. I'm really, really good. And then you try all these sorts of things. Yes, I'm really good. I've worked with Elon Musk. I'm really good. I had an internship in the White House. I'm really good. I worked with Mercedes. I'm really good. Whatever.
Yeah.
We're
Ex
trying to,
Google, right?
yeah, exactly. Ex Google, ex Planatil, ex Microsoft, whatever you. So you're trying to build trust with strangers so that they trust you and bring you into their environment. And that's, while it's possible, that is usually a very, very long road, and it's quite painful. And I have tried, I think it was 5 or 6 different agencies that had different tools and methods for go-to-market activities, but they're all essentially about mass reach out to a selected audience. You define your ideal client and you reach out, and yeah, okay, it doesn't work. Or maybe let me be modest, it didn't work for me. Okay,
Yeah,
and
I've been
maybe,
down that path too, so
yeah,
that makes two of us.
okay, so it doesn't work for us. Okay, and I think so I've gotten into some interesting discussions and so on, but the fastest lead development to proof of concept that I've had through that reach out is it takes 2 years to get someone. You need to be talking to them for years for them to feel like they know you if they haven't known you before. So the um, the best way to get clients is through your network. Okay, so the uh, the first job I got as a consultant was in a company I used to work at as a full-time employee. Okay, and that was kind of easy because I knew who to speak to. I knew what their policies are. I knew what their purchasing policies are. I knew who I need to talk to at what time. When do they have some budget? I knew how much budget they would have. So I knew the entire thing. It was not very easy, but it was relatively easy. Okay. And then the next wave of clients is from individuals whom I've worked with in the one or the other company who had moved on to other companies. And then you speak to them and say, hey, we worked together in that company. Remember the nice work we did together. Maybe there is some need for that thing also in the new company. And I'll give you 2 real life examples. So I've built the software center of excellence for Philips and worked there for a couple of years. And Philips is in the healthcare market. And so a few years later, some executives from Philips have moved on to be executives in Roche, another big pharma healthcare company. And so I reach out to them, and of course they know me and they've worked with me in the past, and they trust me because we've worked together for many years. And hey, do you have some need around the stuff that I do, software excellence? And they're like, well, yeah, maybe we have one project. Why don't you try and work with that team or that team? And so I got another client. And similarly, when I worked in automotive in a certain company, executives from that company moved on to work in Mercedes, in ZF, in Harman, in Ambition. And so when you keep up with your network and you stay in touch with them, keep yourself relevant, make them aware of the service you are providing, you are highly likely to be invited into those um, into those discussions. And maybe I can finish that line of thought with a great example I have from last month when I was catching up with one of my friends from my network, which I haven't spoken in a while. And I suddenly find out while I'm speaking to him while he's cooking dinner for his daughter. And I suddenly find out that his new role is head of software excellence in NVIDIA.
Wow.
So now a good friend of mine is the head of software excellence in one of the best companies on the planet. And it doesn't guarantee me any work, of course, but he is used to consulting with me on software excellence topics, and we get into friendly discussions quite a lot. So if he needs help, I know who is going to call. Okay. So the focus on your existing network, and that would be probably my best advice to anyone.
Found the exact same thing to be true, and then there's this idea of like I like your 2 year example because my co-founder and I, we started, for example, the podcast, and I found that this is a great way to just make new friends. I said, you come in and people are like, well, how much business do you get from that? I go, well, mostly none. I said, for the first 4 years, we've been doing all sorts of marketing things for all these years, and you don't really get much of anything from it for a while. And the same, we started a local meetup, and I said, and again, we didn't get a lot of business the first 20 meetups that we did, but gradually you make new friends at these things, and that's really the key, because you're building trust, and it's long tail. It's 2 years from now, and you're never going to get out of that cycle of boom and bust. Oh, I have clients, I don't have clients. I have clients, I don't have clients, because you haven't, the people you meet today are probably not coming back for a year to 2 years from now for some service that you provide, or even to inquire about it. And the best example we ever had of that was my business partner. We found out that someone that he grew up with, very close friend, was redoing an e-commerce website, and we do that, and they didn't call him. And I said, how close were you with this person? He goes, I grew up, we were friends. I swear we were friends. I go, you couldn't have been that close, because they didn't even think of you. And I said, and you're posting every day on LinkedIn, and they still didn't think of you. But what we learned is every day isn't enough. It's got to be like 5 times a day, and it's got to be on all chat, and you have to call people, and you have to actually take a coffee with them, and you have to be like, you actually have to engage and nurture the network, because that's what happens. Is even the people who know you and who truly know you forget that you do the thing that their boss is looking for when that thing comes down.
Yeah.
And so you really do have to be available. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, for us engineering types anyway, to get around to, is like, because we really just want to build stuff. We don't want to have to share what we're building and the whole build in public. And so
Yeah,
I found a joy, but
yeah, I hear you, and I like to turn this also into an engineering task. So because I'm an engineer to the core, so I use HubSpot a lot, and I
okay.
have all my tasks in HubSpot, and I have HubSpot tasks for me to keep up with the network, and it's distributed along the week. And I have every morning, 10 a.m. in the morning is a difficult time for me, because I get these 20 or 30 email notifications, which are all about, you have to reach out to this guy, have a call with this guy, talk to that guy, and you have to work at
Yeah.
your business. So it's like, this phenomena where people are only looking for a job when they get fired.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So there should be actually 2 tracks in your mind all the time: doing your job and building your career. And these are not the same things, and you need to invest probably equal effort in both. And so I probably spend up to 50% of my time in building the business.
Mm-hmm.
And that is as I said earlier, that is harder work than actually delivering the value to my clients, because delivering the value to my clients is, I mean, I've done that for 30 years. That's easy, right? Tell me a problem you have in the software domain. I'll give you a proven solution that I've used already 50 times. So that's not a problem. But building the network, um, picking up the phone and calling someone, okay? Not sending them an email. Just get the number, call someone, and say, how are you? What are you up to today? What are your biggest problems? When can we grab a coffee? And you need to do that systematically. Otherwise, you get to clients, you stop building the business. Suddenly, these clients leave, and then you are without income for whatever it takes you to get the new clients. So, if you want a constant lead flow, you need to be working on business development constantly.
Always.
Yeah.
I say the same thing with the job too. You know, a lot of folks, this used to happen to me. Like you said, you'd start looking for a job. Unfortunately, when I was employed, or fortunately, I would say, getting in a job as a software engineer was very easy then. You really just like said, hey, I'm available, and you suddenly had calls. The hard part was that you didn't practice all your leet code and your systems design stuff. And so now you're like rapidly trying to get up with that. So I always said that one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was don't let that stuff, like, you should just keep that sharp all the time, because you never know when you'll be called upon. And I think even now I built this little tool called Code Dojo for exactly this, where I tell people I code every day by hand, because I don't want to lose the skill, because you never know when you're going to be called upon to do that.
Yeah. When I was employed in corporates, and I was almost 10 years in Microsoft, almost 10 years in Philips. Regardless of how successful I was, regardless of how well I was doing on the job, I was interviewing at least twice a year for random jobs which I liked, just to keep my options open and to keep fresh my ability to present my resume, to see what kind of offers I'd get. And actually, when I left Philips, it was due to one of these interviews. I was sitting in a workshop with a colleague. We both saw a very interesting opportunity on LinkedIn. We both said, yeah, let's apply. In the coffee break, we just applied. And again, just for the practice of it, to keep sharp in interviewing. And I ended up accepting that opportunity. So just the way I was interviewing now is the way that I invest now in business development. And it has to be a constant, conscious effort of business development, so that your business will keep yielding month after month. Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's a hard world out there. Especially here, you know, I'm interested in your perspective, because I think, you know, from here inside the US, I mean, it feels like every place is like laying off like tens of thousands of workers. But there are other big businesses out there. You mentioned some of them: Philips, Mercedes, that people don't think of because they're like tech adjacent, you know, like but are you seeing in your work, working at these bigger enterprises, are there lots of layoffs of engineers? Are they still hiring, growing? You know, because it's one thing to see Amazon and Meta, and we see this a lot now, but it feels like there's almost like there's a lot of doom and gloom. But I go, but what about all these other businesses that employ software engineers? Is the same thing happening there?
Well, there are ups and downs in every business, and uh, I've seen a few of those waves. My first one in the year 2000, and then 2008, and then 2016, and so I've seen these waves come and go. And I think there are hopes that AI will create a world where there is less need for software engineers. I'm not seeing that in practice. What I see is, I think sometimes companies are using AI as an excuse to a little bit reduced their headcount, but the maybe the word of hope I have to give to the software community is try to think of a business today, any business that is not relying on software. Okay? You won't find it. Every business relies on software. Be it your police department, the airline, your electric company, everyone relies on software. And so this projection that software engineers will be eventually extinct is yeah, I will be very, very, very surprised to see that happen. And maybe not everyone can have a job in the Google or Amazons of the world, and I don't think they should. I think working in such a place is a nice school for how software should be crafted. But there are so many applications in the world. Um, this morning, I was talking to a startup founder. They're writing software. Let's see if I can get this straight. They're deploying some drones that work in the Arctic to forecast weather in a more accurate manner. And they're writing software for these drones to communicate with one another as they deploy together so they can provide more accurate. So, and yeah, that's not Google stuff, but yeah, it's a hell of an interesting startup to work in. And I don't think software is going anywhere but to be more prevalent.
I love the perspective. I tend to agree. You know, as we've rebuilt like open source versions of SaaS products for one of our other shows. The one thing I always say that show highlights for me is what the SaaS company actually does. Is like some of like you're like, oh, like that feature would be kind of hard to replicate. That's pretty cool if you need that. And then the other piece that you learn is that most people don't want to deploy their own software. They're like, I'd rather just pay the $5 or the $10 or whatever it is. So I think that SaaS isn't going anywhere. I think we have some new tools, and this was a really great discussion. And I love to wrap it up with a few things. One of which is do you have any in your career? What was one of the best pieces of advice that you were ever given, that has kind of stuck with you to today that you would pass on to the next generation?
Well, I think uh, the best piece of advice I can remember quickly is one of my great managers in Microsoft saying, "This is your system." So, in other words, don't complain. Everything around you is what you build, and if you're not happy with what you see, you have the power to change that. And so that for me was quite powerful, because up until that point I was constantly complaining about everything around me, and then that was a significant moment for me. Another, let's see if I can think of. Yeah, the other one is actually to always be in learning mode. So always look around for what's out there. So always be curious. Never assume you know everything or something, and always try to extend your knowledge. And that has kept me going through the years as the technologies changes, but my curiosity sticks around. Yeah.
Very, very awesome. I mean, if I think you get into this field because you want that out of a job. You know, it's the kind of thing that you almost never master. You sort of you always feel like, and every time you think you mastered something, you pull the thread, and you're like, wait, there's a whole nother area I could dive into, which is awesome. And then my last question is, because I feel like the last two podcasts I've gotten great book recommendations out of people. So I always ask, Any great book recommendations? Anything you've read recently, or something in your career where you're like, you need to read this if you're a software engineer, or any book really, business or otherwise?
Well, you can see behind me that there are quite a lot of books that I read, but most of them are fiction. If we speak about, um, well, let me give you just two examples that I have here on my table. So um, one of them, and I apologize, it's in Hebrew, but it's a book by Daniel Kahneman, Think Fast, Think Slow.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yep.
So that's one that I really like. And another one, which is related to our discussion earlier about building your business, is quite a dated one, but it's a nice book around being able to build your business. It's called Rainmaking. And so it's, yeah, these are just two that I have here on my table now. So maybe when we do the next podcast, I'll have a couple of other two.
I love it. I love it. Hey, rainmaking is that is the hard. Hey, listen, if you can make that happen, the world is your oyster, no matter what you become. So if we're all gone and we have to become electricians or plumbers or whatever, you'll still have to make it rain. So so that skill will stick with you.
Yeah, exactly.
Mooly, and where can people find you?
Well, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can look me up on LinkedIn, or you can go to our company's website on BetterSoftware.dev, and yeah, always available.
Amazing. I'll have all of that in the show notes for everyone. Mooly, it was great speaking with you today. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much for hosting me. Thank you.